My name is Alida Liberman, and I am a PhD student in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Southern California. Introduction. Within the Abrahamic religions, spaces, people, or objects can become sanctified through sacrifice. Animal sacrifices at the Jewish temple, Islamic Qurbani or ritual sacrifice during Eid al-Adha, and Christian rites of penance and purification that point to Christ's death as the ultimate act of sanctification through bodily sacrifice. Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland and Chernobyl concentration camp in Bosnia can both be seen as sacred spaces, made holy by the blood there shed. However, the sanctity of these sites of genocide is subject to controversy between opposing religious groups. Catholic nuns established a convent and erected a large cross outside of Auschwitz, and the Bosnian Serb government has erected a monument outside of Chernobyl bearing a cross and dedicated to fallen Serb soldiers. In both cases, a sacred Christian symbol is thrust into a space that was sanctified by the suffering of primarily non-Christian people, Jews at Auschwitz and Muslims at Chernobyl. At Chernobyl and to an extent at Auschwitz, the sacred symbol of the cross can be seen as a nationalistic attempt to revise history or to appropriate the sanctity of the space, and it is a major impediment to reconciliation. According to Msuda, a house across the street from the main camp building was used as a rape house during the war and has since been torn down, such that no evidence that it ever existed remains. When I was in Chernobyl in 2005, there was what seemed to be a convenience store and some kind of discotheque or nightclub housed in part of the former camp buildings. And this is the empty spot right here where Msuda told me that the rape house used to be. Included among the victims of Auschwitz, however, are over 100,000 Polish Catholics, including two Catholic saints seen as martyrs, Maximilian Kolbe and Edith Stein. Accordingly, many Catholic Poles also see Auschwitz as a focal point of their own suffering and martyrdom under the Nazis. The site is thus seen by both European Jews and Polish Catholics as a sacred space. In August of 1984, 15 Carmelite nuns set up a convent in the old theater building, used during the war to hold the Zyklon B poison gas used in the gas chambers, adjacent to the walls of the camp. The Carmelites originally intended to pray for the souls of all the murdered and to pray that their murderers would seek atonement and the mercy of God. The convent became contentious in May of 1985 when it started receiving international attention after a Belgian Catholic organization published a widely circulated pamphlet appealing for funds for the nuns to maintain the convent building. The pamphlet spoke of the Auschwitz convent as, quote, a gift for the Pope, a spiritual fortress, and a guarantee of the conversion of many stray brothers. Holocaust survivors and Jewish organizations around the world began protesting the convent, which they saw as a deliberate attempt to Christianize a space, often seen as the largest Jewish cemetery in the world. In February of 1987, Jewish and Catholic leaders met at a summit in Geneva to determine the future of the convent. They agreed to build a Center for Information, Education, Meeting, and Prayer about 500 meters away from, rather than directly overlooking, the Auschwitz site. David Patterson describes a fundamental difference between Jewish and Catholic conceptions of prayer. Catholic prayer has a long tradition of existing in isolation from the broader community, especially in cloistered communities like the Carmelites. It is personal and internal. In Jewish thinking, according to Patterson, prayer is, quote, an encounter, at times adversarial, between God and the soul, and being and acting in the world is essential. For many Jews, the silent prayers of the Carmelites had no meaning without action, making their silence not one of prayerful concern, but rather a silence of indifference. Though some Catholics probably harbored anti-Semitic intentions, many simply did not understand Jewish traditions about prayer at cemeteries. Misunderstanding was mutual. For example, Genevieve Zubricki points out that the vice protest consisting of, quote, Jewish males jumping over fences and demanding to meet with cloistered nuns had been understood by the Catholic community not as a peaceful protest, but as an attack on saintly women and a profanation of a sacred site. Statements by prominent members of the Jewish community attest to how Polish Catholics were unaware of or unconcerned about how the presence of the cross affected the extent to which Jews could practice their own faith in this space. With regard to the removal of the Swieten crosses, Jerzy Kichler head of Poland's Jewish community, stated, quote, "We believe there should be no religious symbols at Auschwitz, not because we have a negative attitude to the cross, but because Jewish tradition does not allow us to pray for our dead relatives in the presence of symbols belonging to another tradition." Jaskowitz elaborated on the issue, saying the cross, quote, "disturbs my prayers. How did I sin that I cannot pray in the holy place where my family died? Both the Carmelite cross and the cross on the Ternopil Memorial represent misuses of the sacred Christian cross symbol, misuses that lead to possible or actual historical revisionism. There were over 100,000 Catholic martyrs at Auschwitz who do deserve a memorial, but not in the insensitive or inflammatory way the Carmelite cross became a memorial. Similarly, there were indeed Serb victims who perished defending their motherland, or were the victims of attacks from Croat or Muslim forces. But there is no reason to put their memorial at Ternopil, especially when there is no memorial there to the victims. In both cases, the two groups must seek better ways of understanding each other and sharing their contested sacred spaces. In Sternberg's words, Auschwitz should not be a place of war of religion, of cross against Star of David, of rabbi against priest, of Christian against Jew. In Return to Kozarac, Kata Samartia, a Serb woman living in Kozarac, states that Serbs can't live without Muslims, Croats can't live without Muslims, they can't do without Serbs, and Serbs can't do without them. I'm happy the Muslims are returning. I hope God lets us all live together. In order for the visions of Sternberg and Samartia to become reality, the conflicting religious and ethnic groups in each region must actively engage in dialogue and seek ways to respect and accommodate each other's shared or sacrificial sacred spaces. Thank you. I want to thank the Institute for giving me the chance to come here and talk to you all about, especially about this issue about Bosnia. It's something that is very important to me. I became interested in Bosnia when I went there on a volunteer trip, and then I went back there for the next 3 summers. I liked it so much, and I think it's really important that I get to share these stories with you, because not a lot of people really know them. I want to say that I think the dangers of historical revisionism and nationalism are very real and strong in Bosnia right now. There's a surface level peace there, but it's a deeply divided country. But what transforms a space is the meaning we imbue it with, I think, and it's humans who make certain spaces as sacred, and I think there's some flexibility to this, and I think that I've seen people, and I've participated in religious services held outdoors, held in hotel rooms, held in various places that are not typically set apart and sanctified as sacred all the time, the way a temple or a church or mosque is, but it's made sacred for that purpose. And similarly, I think that once, even a space that is typically set aside as a sacred space, once there's no one treating it as a sacred space anymore, it becomes desanctified. So I was in Scotland once when I was studying abroad in Edinburgh, and we were on a road trip around the Highlands, and we found this little glen where there were these stones piled up that were way leftovers from, it was a sacred pagan space way back in the day. I mean, people really treated this as a sacred space, and me and particularly my companions didn't see it that way at all, because like being in Roman ruins or something. I think that in one sense spaces have their meaning from what we typically associate them with, but they get transformed by what happens and how we interpret it, and they can also be reclaimed, desanctified. I think it's very flexible, and it comes largely with the associations that we have with it.